I do love Hitler. I don't really care that much about Hitler. I love him. There's a lot of things that I love about Hitler.
Congratulations, you won. Congratulations, you won.
Friends, welcome back to the Brave New Wear Show. My name's Christian. In the mid-2010s, Kanye West, the artist formerly known as Kanye West, was easily the most influential figure in men's fashion. On top of that, he was arguably the most influential figure in hip-hop, with albums that constantly pushed the genre forward while pushing himself as an artist forward. He created things with meticulous detail, and he seemed to have a true, singular sense of the pop culture zeitgeist. Regardless of whether or not you were a fan of his music or his fashion, it is undeniable to say that he was a unique, domineering, and important figure in the culture, especially around the time where streetwear and high fashion were not only becoming mainstream, but kind of merging together. But that isn't the Kanye we know today. Instead, Kanye has traded in his past as arguably the most interesting and influential artist of our time to being a villain.
No, some of you call him Yahoo, but we're gonna call him Nathan.
What's wrong with you?
An outspoken bigot, an anti-Semite, and just like a selfish and increasingly boring person.
What?
It's tragic to see him fall so low. Somebody who felt like their cultural cachet was unlimited, and despite their constant blunders as an iconoclast, there was a time where it felt like Kanye would ultimately never lose his light. He would never lose his position as somebody who was worth listening to, but now all of that seems to be cast aside. I'm making this video because I loved Kanye. I miss the old Kanye.
Straight from the go, Kanye.
I am not somebody who relishes in the fact that he is clearly outside of any respectable norm. I don't relish the fact that he's like a Nazi now.
Blacks are overrepresented in violent crime.
Oh no.
But when you meet an individual black person, you don't apply that. You start with a fresh slate every time you meet someone. Do you do that with Jews? Nope.
Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind?
So there are a couple of things I want to talk about. First being, how influential was Kanye in fashion? Can we separate the art from the artist? And kind of how do we move forward? Those are essentially the three parts. And if you're somebody who disagrees or sees some validity in what Kanye's doing, there's the door. Get the hell out. So let's get into it. When I originally wrote this script, I was planning on going into detail about why I think Ye was an undeniable influence on fashion, assuming that my audience is primarily high fashion connoisseurs who would be skeptical of that take. But I don't think he deserves that type of recognition as of late.
Yeah, but Nazis are like kind of cool.
The fact that someone can be so vile in their opinions and so doggedly sell out, it challenges any credibility that he had as a legitimate artist and puts all of his other work into question. It makes me question if any of it was legitimate. So I won't focus in a lot of detail why I think he was influential, except to essentially break it down into two parts and hope that you kind of take my arguments at face value. The first one being the fact that Kanye helped transform the perception of hip hop and rappers from previously being very static and kind of one note in terms of this is how rappers look and dress, this is how hip hop sounds, to being a genre and those musicians being as fluid and kind of endless potential as other genres. Would any of these artists have the platform or the potential to really codify their aesthetic in as wild and innovative ways as they have without Ye having been an important artist? I think probably not, at least not as much as they have succeeded. So I believe that Ye helped show that the sounds of hip hop can change, but especially the aesthetics and styles of a hip hop artist can change. in the same way that the Beatles would change to their looks and sounds, in the same way that David Bowie would change his looks and sounds. I think that Kanye's ability to do that, to change the look and appearance so frequently, is an important detail in terms of the perception of art and perception of fashion. The second one is, I believe that Ye's previous promotion of high fashion and the avant-garde is significant. While it might be commonplace for any rapper to name drop Rick Owens or Rap Simmons today, when Kanye started talking about high fashion in hip hop, he was elevating it to a different level. His appreciation and his kind of participation was akin to that of the enthusiast. He would begin talking about brands, aesthetics, styles, and kind of ideas that were otherwise more or less kind of contained in people who appreciate high fashion. Whether it's referencing Phoebe Philo and then wearing a woman's lean top at Coachella, or commissioning Riccardo Tisci to make his album art and then wearing leather skirts on stage, this is significant. I think that it's significant to acknowledge that as one of the most popular artists of his time, his attention and then kind of participation in high fashion made this world more well-known. It made it more commonplace. It likely introduced thousands of people, and it almost certainly played some significant influence in the overall zeitgeist. And the reason that I think Kanye is particularly more influential than, say, let's say like somebody like Pharrell, or even like somebody like Tyler the Creator, I think those two artists did kind of influence the public perception of fashion and all these different things. But I think Kanye, being such a big artist, with it being such a big prominent component of his identity, played a somewhat significant role in the kind of maturation, the overall understanding of high fashion in culture. Now I ask you to take those two things at face value. So 2 things. I've re-recorded this next part multiple times because I'm having a hard time coming up with a good answer and articulating it. But it breaks down to, how do we separate the art from the artist, and how do we kind of make sense of Kanye's influence now that he has gone full villain mode? And in terms of the question of the separating the art from the artist, to try to summarize what I rambled about, and I'm not sharing, is that I think that it's irresponsible or less useful to try to truncate artists from the past or present that have been influential just because we find something they've done or think distasteful. And the reason I think that is because at the end of the day, they still have an influence on us, and they still have made an impact. So it's important or relevant for us to at least understand their work so we can understand the influence it has had. And I use the example of Hemingway. Hope this makes sense. Here's another example, Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway was one of the most influential writers of the 20th century, arguably the most influential. It was said of Hemingway that every writer either was trying to write like him or trying not to write like him. This is a great example. This is Lillian Ross's portrait of Hemingway. This came out in the 1950s. This kind of interview of Hemingway was, in a sense, like a character study. It showed people, you know, the charisma Hemingway had, the ambition and like his drive, but it also showed all of his flaws. It showed things like his misogyny, his critical issues that he had with gender in general. It put that on full display. This is a great example of what do we do about Hemingway today?
What did everyone think of The Sun Also Rises?
Take, for example, this beloved scene from 10 Things I Hate About You, the edgy 90s rom-com.
I loved it. He's so romantic.
Romantic? Hemingway? He was an abusive alcoholic misogynist who squandered half his life hanging around Picasso trying to nail his leftovers.
As opposed to a bitter, self-righteous hag who has no friends?
I guess in this society, being male and an asshole makes you worthy of our time.
And this is what I would do. If I was in that classroom, if I'm in this, and you know, me and Heath Ledger are hanging out in the movie, I would stop and say this. It would be silly not to learn about Hemingway, because whether you like it or not, he was a massive influence. But I think it's important also to learn about how he talked about gender, to learn about the things that he wrote about and thought about, because they are flawed, and because these ideas then would reverberate throughout culture. In The Sun Also Rises, he has a protagonist who is essentially impotent. His dick was blown off in war. Whether or not we think that him talking about this impotent person, good or bad, it's important still to have an understanding of it and appreciate it, because it influenced everybody else who thought about men and masculinity. The other part being, how do we make sense of Kanye's influence now? And I actually had an interesting conversation with professional gravedigger, Discord moderator, and Black correspondent for the Brave New Wear show, Bonk. And two things that Bonk told me that I think were interesting was, one, that he emphasized the positive cultural influence that Kanye had on Black men. And he admitted for himself that he probably wouldn't be as into fashion if Ye did not exist. You know, there's a significance in recognizing that there is a cultural component for Blackness and Kanye's kind of role in it that I can't really understand. And I don't want to try to overstep or forget there is an element that I really can't officially comment on. Or the other thing that Bonk mentioned to me in our conversation was that he thinks it's a common trope for our culture, for Western culture, to focus in on a Black man when they're freaking out, when they are out of control. And it's kind of a type of fetishization to really kind of ogle and maybe even get them worked up.
Everybody was on the alert looking for a wanted double homicide suspect who happened to be a Heisman Trophy winner.
And I think that there is probably a component of that with Kanye right now, but I personally think even if that is the case, the things that he's saying and doing are inexcusable. At the end of the day, with talking about Kanye and talking about his influence and what do we do now, I think that the best I can really suggest is to reflect on the qualities that made Kanye interesting, his drive, ego, and arrogance, which made some of his art compelling, is also most likely the qualities that are making him so vile and grotesque right now. Think about the fact that his kind of egotism, it seems like a direct line to being obsessed with aesthetics and being obsessed with fashion. And that same egotism seems to have driven him towards anti-Semitism. Maybe this correlation is weak, and maybe it's just kind of me coming up with some moralistic answer in order to kind of explain the relationship between these things. But I mean, this is the point of YouTube. Let me know in the comments down below what you think, and I will do my best to try to respond, try to be civil, and otherwise, I'll catch you next time.